I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with J.D. Danny McCabe. J.D. is a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania native and the author of The Third Gift, a true story about a tumultuous marriage gone wrong. He now speaks with organizations across the country about his experiences. From an early age, Danny was independent and a practical realist. He began writing his diary as a historical journal of events in the demise of his marriage that evolved quickly and came without context. JD was encouraged to share his unbelievable voyage in rediscovering himself by the many people who witnessed and heard about his journey firsthand. He is blessed with two beautiful adult children. JD resides in the Charleston, South Carolina area. Welcome to the show, JD.
Kara, good morning, and thank you for having me on your podcast. I absolutely appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you on here this morning. Well, I feel like you're so much more than this bio. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Oh, yeah. So I am the middle child, the middle neglected child of nine, five of nine,
Wow.
six boys, three girls, Irish Catholic, as you had noted in the opening. We're born and raised in the northwestern Pennsylvania area. Left there quite some time ago. I've been in the pharmaceutical medical field for 32 plus years, and
Wow.
as a result of that, I've moved around quite a bit for my employment, and finally settled in the Charleston, South Carolina area.
Nice. Have you done big moves with your job?
Yeah, I've moved from Pennsylvania to Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky, then down to the Raleigh, North Carolina area where I spent 19 years, and then been down here a little over 3 years. So yeah,
Wow.
heading further,
Yeah.
further south away from the snow and the cold. So
Yeah, I can't say I blame you. We're from Chicago and we've done the same.
yeah, I've been blessed to be able to do it. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing I've talked to people about too is I mean, we can move because of my husband's job, but it kind of gives us a little bit of panic thinking about him getting out of the military. It's like, well, what if we pick somewhere and we don't love it? Because then you're not moving. I mean, yes, we can go get jobs somewhere else, but it's like the job was moving us regularly. It's like, what if we don't like the place we decide to settle in, then what do we do?
Yeah, you will figure it out, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a favorite place you've lived so far?
I would say right now, I would say Charleston is probably one of my favorites. So, I mean, I'm 20 minutes to the beach, 20 minutes to downtown
Nice.
Charleston, lots of good restaurants, and the weather is beautiful. So, I think it's probably one of my favorites. But I have visited San Diego many times, and I do love San Diego, California as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. If the price point wasn't so high, I would
correct,
consider it.
correct, correct. Yeah, yeah, great to visit.
So,
I don't know if I could afford to live there, but yeah,
yeah. Yeah. The sticker shock sometimes still when I see a real estate listing, I'm like, what? It's just, yeah, mind boggling sometimes.
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So, well, you are also the author of The Third Gift. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, I mean, the brief version of the book is as I look at it now, at the time, I would say that for the first 17 years of our marriage, it was very stable, very happy. I was building my career. We were raising two children. We had moved quite a bit, as I had referenced. And perhaps there were some things that I didn't see. But about the 17, 18-year mark, things began to unravel, and they unraveled pretty quickly, to the point where she began accusing me of infidelity, drug addiction, and ultimately, as it would
Wow.
turn out, that everything that she would accuse me of doing, she was doing. The story is very complex. Yeah, the story is very complex and complicated, um, and I unpack it all in the book the best that I could as a first time author. Um, as it would turn. So, I mean, along that journey of, she would essentially gaslight me. There would be significant projection involved. Her mom would get involved, thus the subtitle of the book, My Dance with the Devil and Her Mother. I can say it with a
Wow.
smile on my face now, but it wasn't. it wasn't a
Yeah.
joke. It wasn't a joke. It's something I had to get my head around as things began to unfold. Is how could I have been in love, and how could I have been sleeping next to somebody that was just that evil? So I would spend, when things began to unravel, she hollowed me out. I would spend 9 days in psychiatric lockup across two different psych facilities with a police transport involved.
Wow.
I would later discover with that she had not only broke me down emotionally, but she set me up for the involuntary commitment. She was writing letters behind my back to my family practitioner and my psychiatrist at the time. The exact letters verbatim are in the book. I didn't edit them. I wanted them to be as raw and as real as possible.
Wow.
So after getting out of there, I would spend another 6, 7 months in the marriage trying to figure out what was going on, and I started to see some signs that concerned me about her, with increased delusions and paranoia and mood swings. Again, everything that she had
Yeah.
accused me of doing, she was actually doing. And then I would be exiled out of the home. I would be alienated from my daughter for almost 2 years. Um,
Wow.
I would go through a domestic violence trial while she filed trumped up domestic violence charges against me. The 4-day alimony trial is in the book. So
Wow.
the title of the book is The Third Gift.
Okay.
The first two gifts are my kids. They're both, young adults now.
Yeah.
Very proud of how they've turned out and the choices that they've made, in spite of the fact that they endured this whole journey. This whole journey lasted 5 years. My journey through hell lasted from 2014 through the end of 2018. A
Wow.
long, dark journey of 5 years, not only of the psych facility and going through the court systems and all that fun stuff, but the discoveries that I would make through the revelation of the third gift. The third gift was, she would accuse me of giving her sexually transmitted herpes. When,
Oh my goodness.
yes, we sat down, once we had separated and I was exiled out of the home, she used my daughter to get me out of the home, just said, go for a week until Katie settles down. And I agreed to go for a week. And little did I know that that would mean I'm not coming back into the home. She had
Yeah.
done some things legally to prevent me from coming back into the home. She was extremely good at manipulation, gaslighting, so forth, so on.
Wow.
Um, and when that accusation was made, I was in one room with my attorney. She's in another room. There's another attorney going back and forth as a mediator. She dropped that accusation on the table and quite nonchalantly said, "Oh, by the way, your soon to be ex-wife wanted me to let you know that you gave her sexually transmitted herpes." That was an intervention from God. He
Yeah.
smacked me across the face to say, "Son, your marriage is over." So once she made that accusation, I had the knowledge, being in the medical pharmaceutical field for 30 plus years, to begin to look at her medical claims and pharmacy claims
Yeah.
through our insurance company's website that I had no idea I had access to. Once that accusation was made, bright and early the very next morning, as I'm heading to Pennsylvania, I'm like, I have to get out of town. I need some support of family.
Yeah.
I pulled over, pulled out my iPad, and I looked up her prescription claims. And it was there that I began the discovery that not only did she have sexually transmitted herpes, but I would later map out that she pretty much had contracted every STD out there.
Oh my
Just for the
goodness.
sheer amount of antibiotic prescriptions that she had and some other medications. But I also discovered her hidden prescription drug addiction.
Yeah. I was wondering when you mentioned like the delusions and the mood swings, if having been in the pharmaceutical industry, that maybe you had picked up on some of these side effects where other people might not have picked that up because they're not as familiar
Well, and
with it.
that's an excellent point. But the other complicating factor for me was early in our marriage, about 7, 8 years into our marriage. She had started complaining of some symptoms, and she would go see specialist after specialist after specialist, and she would claim that she had been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. Okay.
Okay.
And I never questioned her. I never asked to see her medical records. I went with her on many of the visits to
Yeah.
cardiologists, to rheumatologists, to whoever. But as we would get down the road to the alimony trial, we would subpoena her medical records, and we would discover that, in fact, she does not have an autoimmune disease. That she went to a prominent clinic down in Jacksonville, Florida on 2 occasions that I paid for, that I knew she was going to, that they stated in the medical records that were read in court that she does not have an autoimmune disease. And if in fact she does, it's a very, very minor form. So I believe
Okay.
that she had a form of Munchausen's going on.
Oh, yeah.
On top of that, the other thing that I would discover once we separated is that I had been chronically exposed to arsenic. So 9 day
Wow.
stay
Oh
in
my
psych
gosh.
facility, chronic exposure to arsenic. I was exposed to the STDs that she brought home. I want to be very clear that I never contracted anything. I've been tested
Yeah.
times for everything, but again, it was God truly intervening to begin to give me the beginning of the truth of what happened in our marriage, and for me to be able to reestablish some sense of emotional stability and reestablish
Yeah.
my identity that was
I
taken from me.
imagine that you felt like you were losing your mind.
Well, I was, and
Yeah.
my therapist at the time, once we separated, and I had a fantastic therapist. She says to me, she said, I don't know how you didn't go insane.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, the title of the book couldn't be any more perfect, because it truly, her greed, her evil, I see it as a gift, that it opened my eyes to actually what was going on. Because, Kara, the thing that nobody will ever understand other than myself is, had she not played that card, had she not accused me of
Yeah.
that, I would never have looked. I never
Yeah.
would suspect that she was cheating on me. I would never suspect that she had a hidden prescription drug addiction, because the paranoia, the delusions, the things that I was seeing in her. Knowledge is power, right?
Sure.
But it also can be a weakness. And my knowledge, being in the medical field, pharmaceutical field, thinking she had an autoimmune disease, all of the signs and symptoms I started to see, I was chalking it up and attributing it to her autoimmune disease that she never had. I would consult with neurologists and rheumatologists that I had personal relationships with from knowing them for years, and ask them off the record, hey, this is what I'm seeing. They're
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah, with an autoimmune disease, it can affect every organ in your body. It could be causing her paranoia and delusions. And then so
Yeah, it's
clarity.
a good umbrella term to kind of like stuff all of these symptoms under.
Absolutely, but
Yeah.
clarity is priceless, and I thank God each and every day for His intervention, for giving me the strength to make it through it, for guiding my kids as they made it through it. But again, I think back, I don't know where I would be if she never made that revelation. I don't know
Yeah.
where I'd be as a man. I don't know where I'd be emotionally. I don't know where I'd be with my relationship with my kids, especially my daughter. My favorite chapter in the book to write and to read was chapter 19, titled Hi Daddy, when she came back into my life. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Oh gosh.
fortunately, she was old enough. She was 17 when she came back into my life. She was old enough to begin to see some signs and symptoms that concerned her. So she came
Yeah.
home from school one day, and mom couldn't walk, mom couldn't talk. There was dog food all over the floor, and mom was in a drug withdrawal. And I only know
Yeah.
that because I had access to her records, and I was
Sure.
from a distance. I was watching them like a hawk, and she had stopped pretty much all her meds cold turkey. And I knew that something bad was coming, but she was addicted to 3 different formulations of amphetamines,
Wow.
benzodiazepines, mood stabilizers, you name it. And I mapped out the trail of who was actually, prescribing these medications
Yeah.
for her. And then I would also discover, I mean, it was one shocking thing after another.
I think that's the can be a failure of our medical system though too, is there's not crosstalk amongst the various specialists, and so it can be to the detriment, right, of someone that's maybe getting prescribed all of these. I mean, you know better than me probably, but
No,
all of
no.
these medications that maybe counteract one another or have side effects with one another, but or can be manipulated in like this situation to be getting many prescriptions
Yeah, and
to fulfill.
your point is very well taken. And it's a very broken system, because we don't have there is no connectivity. So she was able to not
Yeah.
only bounce from doctor to doctor, but she was able to bounce from hospital to hospital, and there's no way for them to check her history.
Yeah.
Nobody.
Well, that or they don't have time. They're
Right,
seeing so
right.
many patients in a day, they don't have time to follow up. And it's just, like you said, I think it is a very broken system.
They never questioned it. So and that was brought out at our trial many times. She was able to self-report what she had, so she could go to this
Yeah.
spinal psychiatrist and tell her, "Look, I'm suffering from brain fog as a result of my autoimmune disease, and my previous therapist who stopped practicing, it was all lies, but she
Yeah.
had me on these medications, and so they would just continue the medications, and so."
Wow.
Yeah, it's and we wonder why the healthcare system, there's so many expenditures and why it's so expensive. But again, people can bounce around, they can self-report. There, as you said, there's no crosstalk. There's nobody validating what somebody actually has.
Yeah.
And so she was able to navigate a very broken system.
Yeah. As you were going through this journey, I imagine, right, this identity crisis, you kind of alluded to that earlier
Mm-hmm.
on, of like everything you thought you knew is nothing that
Right.
you thought
Right.
you knew, and
It,
how disconcerting that can be.
yeah, and to reconcile a couple of things really, that the woman that I loved really didn't love me. But I came to terms with the fact that she just is not capable of it. And
Yeah.
I'm 4 or 5 years later, I'm still sorting some things out, but I've found peace and I've found happiness. Um, and I've come to, so they believe, and she's never been officially diagnosed because she never went to a competent therapist. She went to a therapist that would
Sure.
believe her narrative is that more than likely she has borderline personality disorder. You probably got Munchausen's
Okay.
on top. And that's what I asked. I was on a podcast a couple of months ago with a couple of therapists, and I said, how did she
Okay.
keep all this tucked away for 17 years? And they
Yeah.
said she didn't. So there's some more complication in the book regarding her relationship with her father. So she was estranged from her father when I met her. She was estranged from him for 10 years. He,
Okay.
he came out of the closet when she was 2, accepted his homosexuality, but she had a great relationship with him up until her first marriage broke up. So
Okay.
she had been married very briefly prior to me meeting her. And again, I got a story about that. And her mother validated the story as well as her grandmother. So I took it at face value. But
Yeah.
I now see it in a different light. But she had been estranged from her father. And I thought all along that when her father died, she went off the deep end because of the guilt of losing 10 years of his life. But I had a therapist
Sure.
a couple of months ago tell me, no, no, her father was her first victim. And then
Huh.
once he passed away, she said they target one victim at a time, whether she had a good relationship or a bad relationship with him. Her
Oh my
father,
God.
her father was her first victim. Once he passed away, she moved on to you. So there's a lot of unanswered questions, but I have the majority of the questions that I need answers to. And I
Yeah.
thank God every day for that. As funny as it may sound, God does have a sense of humor, I believe. So he used the herpes card to let me know that I was too blind to see what was actually going on in the marriage. But
Yeah.
the big umbrella of her alleged autoimmune disease really clouded things for me.
Yeah. So when you went to write this book, I imagine it was probably a very emotional journey to kind of dig back through and write these stories, but did you find healing with it as well?
I did. That's an excellent question. I would describe it as a double-edged sword
Okay.
because I had to. So I started creating as you alluded to, the diary or the journal, which was the huge foundation for the book. I created that when I got out of the psychiatric facility. My 2 brothers came to town, and they said, "Look, we'll support whatever you want to do,
Hmm.
but you need to start documenting things. You've been
Yeah.
misdiagnosed with bipolar 2. You've had the cops call on you. You've been locked up in a psych facility. You need to begin to protect yourself." So I started laying out
Hmm.
journaling pretty much every day, whether it was a good day or a bad day, or started documenting everything that happened. So as I went to write the book, using that as my foundation, there was so much, Kara, that I compartmentalized and packed away.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, I forgot that happened.
That's a protective response, I imagine, of your brain.
Yeah. Once things settled down a little bit, and as I said, started writing the book, I'm like, wow, I forgot that happened. So when the
Hmm.
book came out, I started. I had to go back into therapy because I started to experience some PTSD,
Yeah.
primarily around my time in the psychiatric facility, and just worked through a lot of feelings that were resurrected as a result of producing the book. But I was encouraged to write the book for many reasons. First of all, it's a crazy story, and I've only skimmed the surface. But
Yeah.
my female therapist, and I stress female because I don't want people to think I wrote the book as a men too versus me too. But my female therapist said, when you're done with this journey, you absolutely need to write a book because there's not enough books, if any, about men on the other side of the equation.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, matter of fact, when you write your book, here's a name I want you to use for me. And many others that got pulled into our situation. And that's why I wrote it under a pen name and changed names, because I wanted to not only protect the privacy of my kids, but everybody that got pulled in.
Yeah.
But people would call and go, hey, any new updates, any new discoveries? I mean, I became like a rolling lifetime movie. And I would say, yeah, well, sit down. You're not going to believe what I just discovered the other day. But anyhow, they're like, oh man, when you write your book, here's the name I want you to use for me. And so sure enough, we wrote the book. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what did you learn about yourself in this writing journey?
I'm very good with run-on sentences. Yeah.
I'd probably be the same if I tried.
There's a lot of humor in there. There's a guy that used to work for me. So the co-author is a guy by the name of Kenny, and we changed his last name to In Theme. If people read it, they'll see it says In Theme, but it's actually a joke. It stands for Kenny in the AM. So because I said I got to come up with a funny name for you, but there was a cocaine addicted morning DJ on a program called I'm Dying Up Here that used to be on Showtime. It's about comedians trying to make their way up. And so his name was Kenny in the AM. So I said, we're going to go with that. We're going to go with Kenny in the AM for you
I
as,
love
as
it.
the co-author. But when I would write, and I wanted, and again, I appreciate the opportunity to be on a podcast where we can talk about writing. But when I wrote with music in my ears. Always
Yeah.
listen to music. And that's probably where the run-on sentences would come from. But when I first started to write, as I would tell folks that have reached out to me, is just put it on paper. Don't worry about
Yeah.
grammar. Get your thoughts down, and then of course you're going to do rewrite after rewrite after rewrite, and you're going to go back and go, man, that's repetitive. You use that word a
Hmm.
lot. So prior to editing, I actually used Grammarly. So I would put everything into Grammarly, and Grammarly would make the suggestions as to change this phrase or that phrase. And then, of course, I had a formal editor that did a fantastic job. But the other thing I want to stress is, so when I started to write the book, my publisher at the time recommended a few other books to read to get a sense of style and all that, and some of it was
Hmm.
quite flowery. So I would say anybody that is a writer is write in your voice. It's got to
Yeah.
be your voice. It's got to be how you talk. It's just like the way somebody sings. You're not going to. Everybody has a different style, so use your style and use your voice. So I wrote the first couple of chapters and tried to make them a little more flowery. And I'm like, no, this isn't me, and I'm gonna write it in my voice.
I think to your point of that, right? I think when we are doing things authentically, I think it just feels so much different. And you can tell when you're forcing something to put it into this box versus authentically being you, the freedom that comes with that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And so, and similarly, I recorded an audiobook. And
Okay.
I narrated it. I narrated it from the closet in my home.
Love
Stuffed
it.
every pillow and blanket and everything I had, and I recorded it on my iPhone. And there was a guy that my publisher hooked me up with out of Texas that did all the audio editing. I would just send it to
Yeah.
him over WeShare, and he did the audio editing for me. And so we've got all platforms. We've got an ebook. We've got an audiobook, paperback, and a hardcover. But the funny story about recording that in my closet is I did it at the summertime and had the door closed, had my little stand. He's like, have the blue tape on the floor, and every time you record, stand on that blue tape, so don't deviate from that. But the first couple of chapters I sent him, he's like, there's a whistling sound. And I said, is it my speech? He said, no, there's, and I looked up and there was a vent right above me.
Oh.
where the air conditioning was coming in. So when I would record, I would have to shut off
Oh,
the air conditioning in
yep.
Charleston in
In the
July.
summer.
So I would record at night. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And so again,
How much would you try to do like in a session? Would it be just till you kind of felt good, or did you have a couple, I'm going to get through 3 chapters, or how do you set that up when you record?
that's a great question. I would do in somewhat I've been back in a loving relationship, a true loving relationship for the last
Hmm.
4+ years, and my girlfriend is she's into audio and e-learning and
Okay.
all that stuff, so she's an expert in that. So I would do a chapter at a time, but she
Okay.
through her coaching, she's like, you've got to read through it first without recording. Think about where you're going to hit the emphasis. Speak with a little more
Yeah.
emotion. So I would send a chapter or two to her, and she'd be like, "Nah, sounds a little flat. There's a lot of emotion behind what you read or what you wrote. So have some impact with emotion." So I would rehearse page by page, then I would hit record. And if there was a
Okay.
boo boo, my guy would tell me just go back and clip it, and he did a great job.
Yeah. Well, you're speaking my language. I'm a big audiobook reader solely because of my kids. And so just fitting books into my life,
Yeah,
audiobooks are a gem for me. So I'll be going and grabbing a copy
I yeah, I
this
look I
morning.
look forward to your feedback. It's been an interesting journey. My father had an excellent way with the written word. And
Okay.
yeah, and unfortunately I lost my dad right before right before the judge's decision came down. He passed from dementia. So as I was going through my nightmare for
Yeah.
4 or 5 years, he lost the ability to communicate, either written word or verbal.
Yeah.
So dementia just tore him up. But he was a man of very few words. But when
Okay.
he would write, oh, he had a powerful writing style. So I talk about my dad a little bit in the book, and
What an influence on your life.
yeah, and how he would sit on my shoulder, and as I would write something, I could hear him saying, "No, no, 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 you don't want to say it that way." That was his
Yeah.
his catchphrase. No, 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 don't say it that way. But
I love
anyhow,
that.
yeah, so that's why I went with JD or James after my father, to kind of honor
Okay.
my father. My mother was an avid reader. I lost her about 2 weeks after the book came out. She was an
Wow.
avid reader, lost her eyesight to macular degeneration. So she started with audiobooks. And that's why I said, you know what, I want to do an audiobook in honor of my mom. There's a lot of personal stuff behind the book. But it was cathartic to write for sure. I'm glad
Yeah.
that I did it. What I will say too to anybody that's looking to write one or whatever is, and I have an excellent publisher, but go in with the appropriate expectations, right? Everybody thinks they're going to write a book and they're going to sell millions of copies and they're going to make
Yeah.
millions of dollars. So I went in with the right expectation that I'm going to do this for family and for friends and for me and for my parents. And if it
Mhm.
resonates with people, so be it. But I am actively promoting it on, Instagram and
Yeah.
TikTok and various social media platforms. But any of the proceeds from the book are going to support a couple of nonprofit foundations. And one of them is,
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, one of them is a good friend of mine who I lost touch with, and we've reconnected throughout this. And this is been one of the blessings of this whole journey is re-strengthening, reconnecting with old friends, making new friends, and strengthening family relationships and such. But his son was decorated military and took his own life stateside at the age of 26. So
Oh
he
my.
he created an endowment fund in his honor
Okay.
at Appalachian State in North Carolina. So I've been supporting his endowment fund, and I'm supporting a center for women. So I'm looking to do some good with the proceeds from the book, and so I'm supporting selective nonprofits as a result.
I love that. That's a really cool twist
Yeah,
to it
yeah,
all.
yeah.
Yeah. I love that. And I imagine, like your therapist said, that you could go into this with, even if my story touches one person who's maybe going through something similar, that is what mattered.
And interestingly enough, I've heard from thousands of people. I've been blessed to have developed quite a nice following on Instagram and on TikTok, and at least 3 people that I can count of that have thanked me for putting the book out there because they discovered that their father and or mother had been poisoned, were being poisoned by their new husbands or wives or whatever the case may be. And I get
Yeah.
questions all the time as to what were your symptoms, how'd you get it tested, the support from men and women alike that have been in abusive relationships has been overwhelming. Of course, you've got 10% of the folks that are naysayers and whatever
Yeah.
bash you for putting it out there. But I'm like, listen, I'm promoting the book, so relax.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. Wow. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and
sure.
let's talk about who you are as a reader and what genres you enjoy reading.
Yeah, so from a reading perspective, I've always been a big nonfiction guy. I
Okay.
like and since my journey in the past, prior to going through my nightmarish situation, Kara, I was a big business reader, reading leadership books, books about personal development because I was in sales leadership and such, and people development, emotional intelligence. So read a
Sure.
lot of business oriented books. Since then, I've enjoyed reading more memoirs, nonfiction inspirational stories about other people's journeys. So I've tried
Yeah.
to support first time authors. I try to support folks that I've connected with through the various social
Sure.
media platforms, and just I get inspiration from reading about other people's strength through adversity. And I will tell you,
Yeah.
it's one of the things that kept me grounded as I went through my 5-year journey. And it's something I told my kids is everything is relative. If you
Hmm.
stay in isolation and you look with tunnel vision, you will think that your world is falling apart, but when in fact, you don't have it so bad. So
Yeah.
when I lived out of my car and out of a hotel and out of suitcases for 3.5 months as we were trying to figure
Wow.
out what was going on in the marriage, I met a lot of people in my travels. And as they would share their stories, I'd be like, wow, I
Yeah.
don't, I don't have it so bad. So stop with the self pity because I don't have it so bad. So that's why I love reading other people's inspirational stories.
Yep, absolutely. And that journey of what they go through and where they get in the
Yeah,
end. I love that too. Walking in someone else's shoes.
yeah, yeah, and that's also part of one of the motivations for writing my book too is to say, hey, maybe it inspires somebody.
Yeah. Well, awesome. And then you have been so gracious to bring a book flight for us
Yes, ma'am.
today of three books that have impacted you.
Yeah, and there's something, and I think the biggest one at the top of the list would be, and again, the title could be Be a Woman, but the title was Be a Man, Be the Man that God called you to be by Father Larry Richards. It was recommended to me by my deacon at the time we separated. He recommended that book, and there was a phrase in that book that I will never forget. Um, that helped me to get to forgiveness of her and forgiveness of her mother pretty quickly. And it was, you only love God as much as you love the one you
Hmm.
like the least.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was powerful and it knocked me back at the time. And I had to talk to my therapist and the deacon at the time. Their counsel on that was it's like, no, we're talking about compassion. We're talking about forgiveness. And
Yeah.
it's about living for eternity, right? And leaving a
Yeah.
legacy. And then the second one would be a book by Shar Westfall called A Beautiful Tragedy. And and Shar is another Ballast Books author, but her husband was a Navy SEAL. He was killed. He was killed in Operation Red Storm, I believe it was called in 2008. He was called in for the rescue mission for the Navy SEALs that were trapped on the mountain. And of course, Marcus Luttrell was the only lone survivor. But
Correct. Yeah.
her book is written from her point of view of grieving through it and getting through it and finding life again after tragedy. Very well written book, and I've enjoyed reading Shar's
Yeah.
Shar's book.
And I'm just listening to the title, and I was thinking this as you were talking is God throws things in our path that we don't want sometimes, right? It's like I'm kicking and screaming because I know I'm going to have to go through this journey, but it sounds painful. It sounds awful. I don't want to, I lose a loved one, for example. But what comes from that, right? And the life lessons that we learn is incredible. And God had that plan all along. It just in the very beginning of it, you're like, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to go. And it always makes me think about that moment of the agony in the garden, even where Jesus has this moment of like, if you can take this cup from me, please do, right? And it gives me this piece of like, well, even Jesus at one point was like, I don't want to go through this. Please take it away.
Yeah.
But he did.
Yeah.
And it gives me the courage to continue to take another step forward in these moments of grief or tragedy or whatever it is, because there's going to be unexpected twists in our lives that happen.
Yeah, and we can't control it. And there's purpose in pain, and
Yeah,
I
purpose to
learned
the pain. Yeah.
and I learned that real quick. And I stopped asking within a couple of weeks of all of this stuff crumbling down. And this was post psychiatric facility. When I was in the psychiatric facility, I thought, man, I'm at rock bottom. It can't get any worse. Little did I know there was 4 years of hell waiting for me. I just didn't know it, but I just simply, I found comfort in the church. It didn't matter what denomination, didn't matter if official mass was going on or not. If I was traveling quite a bit at the time. If I started to feel the shakes or needed a sense of, I became overwhelmed. I'm like, I have to find a church. And
Yeah.
just finding the comfort of a church just to sit in quiet. And I would say to him, pretty quickly. I stopped asking why. And I just said,
Yeah.
let your will be done and just walk with me. And he hasn't disappointed. But yeah, and there's opportunity within adversity. And I believe it's a military term, right? That was coined in 2003, I believe, in Iraq, is embrace the suck.
Yeah.
Embrace it. You can't
Yeah.
run from it. So
Yeah.
might as well grab it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I have made that mental shift too in my mind of when something comes up, it's like, okay, God, what are you trying to teach me here now?
Yep. And he will teach you, and he will teach you in his time. That's the other thing I
Yeah.
had to learn is, wait for the Lord. Let your heart be strong and take courage, but wait for the Lord.
Yeah. Well, sorry to digress a little bit. Her title struck me of A Beautiful Tragedy because it's
No, it's
so
an
true.
excellent book. And then the other one that
Yeah.
I want to go back and reread is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. Yeah,
Yeah.
about Santiago's journey, of finding personal belonging. And so, yeah, I've become more of an avid reader. Not a fiction guy, but my mother was a big fiction guy.
Yeah. So in your busyness, how do you find time to
I,
read?
I make time if I'm traveling. I make sure I have a book with me on the plane. I want to get into audiobooks, but I find I
Yeah.
um I need to have the physical book to
Okay.
stay focused. Otherwise, if I got the audiobook on, I end up multitasking and I'm not paying attention to what's in my ear.
Yeah, I sometimes enjoy fiction as audio because I feel like you don't have to pay attention as much, as long as you kind of have how the story's going. If you zone out for 30 seconds or so, it's like you pick back up. Where nonfiction, I feel like you're always
Yep.
learning something.
And there's millions and millions and millions of books to choose from, and that's
Oh
why,
yeah.
as a first-time author, I stay out of bookstores because it'll make your knees buckle. You walk in and go, oh
Yeah.
my goodness, how am I going to separate and promote my book from all these millions of books that are out there?
Well, your story will be heard by those that need it. I truly
Well,
believe
thank
that.
you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and how I love to end our show here is with our bonus pairing. So these are just a quick speed round of questions here. So are you a rereader?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then what is one book you've read that has changed your life?
Man, that's a great question. I would say, well, there's a couple. I already referenced The Be a
Okay.
Man, right? So that
Yep.
changed my life, and that's one I've just reordered the other day because I want to reread it. There's another one, and I don't know that your listeners would relate to it, but it's one that my therapist had recommended to me. I forget the author. I think it was Dr. Weissman, but it was a book called "I Hate You, Don't Leave Me." It's about
Okay.
understanding. And so it
Wow.
was a book my therapist recommended as we were headed towards divorce. And she was great. She's like, you need to read this book. Then I want you to read that book. You need to be prepared. You have no idea what you're about to step into as you go through this trial and your character is assassinated over and over and over. You need to understand what you're dealing
Yeah.
with. So I Hate You, Don't Leave Me is the only book that I ever read. And it's about understanding somebody with borderline personality disorder and their approach and their
Sure.
tactics and how to handle them. And so obviously I had to have
Yeah.
some indirect dealings with her through the attorneys as we move forward. And we still had to have some dealings with the kids. They were teens, but yeah, it was a book I put down and I literally said, holy cow, I didn't say cow, but I'm like,
Yeah.
this is the life that I've been living. where she would pull you in intimately, and then 10 days later, she's abusing you again. And so I Hate You, Don't Leave Me, and the other one probably would be a Walking on Eggshells. Yeah.
Okay.
So at the time, they were life changing to me because of the fact that it was an aha moment, like, wow, okay, you weren't crazy.
Yeah. Where's your favorite place to read?
My favorite place to read, to be honest with you, in bed. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And then lastly, what are you reading next?
I am reading a book, and this might bore your audience, but I'm currently reading, and I'm finishing up a book called Beyond the Walls. Yeah. By Zev
Okay.
Neuwirth. So it's Zeevneuwirth. It's about the shifts in healthcare. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I would be interested
Yeah,
in
it's
that.
fascinating about the transformation in healthcare. It's slow coming, but it's about Amazon, Uber Health, other transformational
Wow.
organizations that are taking healthcare really and trying to do their very best to make it more humanistic or holistic, but not
Yeah.
HOLIS, WHOL, and more
Yeah.
healthcare in the home. It's about applying technology and technological platforms to artificial intelligence, data analytics, all that, so that we can remove the waste within healthcare. But the interesting part of the read is again around Amazon, Walmart, all of those guys, what they're doing to disrupt or provide innovation to change the way we provide healthcare. Because as we talked, interestingly
Yeah.
enough, the intriguing part of the book for me is just because of the fact that the system is terribly broken, and I've known it for 30 plus
Yeah.
years, but the way healthcare is delivered absolutely needs to change. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's the book that I'm finishing up right now is Beyond the Walls. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I appreciate all the time you've given me.
Absolutely. And I thank you for sharing your wonderful platform with me. It's been a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with JD McCabe and his book flight of books that impact. We'd love to hear what other books you'd pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. That is also where you can find more information about today's book flight or other books that we talked about. I want to inspire a community of readers. So whenever you share a post about what you are reading or what you are reading next, especially if you have heard about it on the show, please tag us on Facebook or Instagram at Bookish Flights. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Your review not only helps the show, but it also helps the podcast to reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure you will not miss an episode. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.